Hey there. I wanted to send out at least a screen capture, a screencast of the Prezi from class. I apologize for the confusion with Collaborate Ultra. Just in the future, make sure you're logging into that day's class. Each of the sessions. What happened was I set up a recurring session, and so instead of it being just one or the very top, it was actually the second one, and it should have said like 10, 7, 20. And so I understand how the confusion could have existed. And again, I'm sorry. But this is the Prezi that we did for Wednesday night. And I wanted to take you through it. And if you'll come with me on this journey, so to try to recreate, can't really recreate the experience of class because we did a lot of sharing with each other about our lesson plans and our evaluations. But I will take you at least through the Prezi for a couple of minutes here. And we started with a bell ringer. And the bell ringer, the start of class, was an activity that I wanted you to do that actually I'm going to show you right here. I asked you all to take a look at two of these scans, okay? And so this is the first scan, and this is from a book called To Teach, A Journey Through Comics, and this is by Bill Ayers. And you've got this picture. So this is what the administrators have given him. This is what they want his room to look like. And the commentary here, what do we want from our classrooms? And so I wanted you to, at the start of class, based on the readings we did for Wednesday, especially the one from Wade that discusses the socially just and the democratic classroom, what do we want? And what messages do students get when they walk through the door? What does the space invite them to do? And so obviously this is a traditional classroom setup with the desks and rows, and we can even think, who does that favor? Does that favor collaboration between and among students, or does this favor a direct message from the teacher? Is it a top-down, or is it a grassroots situation? And then, of course, at the bottom, is that a shopping list of toys for class? No. It's a picture of the class that they want me to do. And she says, there's no place to play, which is clever. And then I shared this. And the commentary here at the top is, what would an environment built around a desire to know and be look like? And I encouraged you as the student to think about, what does the democratic classroom look like? How do you set that up? If you have a blank slate, if you have the ability to do what you would, what would it become if it was organized around democratic principles? What would it become if we based our classrooms on social justice and equity and fairness and caring and kindness? The environment is more than bricks and mortar, more than books and blocks. The environment has other dimensions, and those are the dimensions that we start with. And I shared both of these, and then at the end of class shared this. And so this is the classroom as he's designed it and set it up. You'll notice this looks nothing like this. There's no teacher desk. There's no set areas. There are learning centers. There are places where students can engage and be stimulated by materials and primary documents and resources and toys. It is not chaos. It is organized. I've actually always believed you can organize chaos. The classroom might look a mess, but it doesn't mean it is. And so that was the opening part of class. And we posted on the Padlet, and we shared our thoughts about what we were thinking towards a democratic classroom before we dove into the rest of class. And we started with some quotes. And I need to find one of my books that I was reading here. Might have to pause, but there's two quotes here from John Dewey about democracy. And the first, and these are both quotes that you might use for your digital resume and the philosophy. And this is, I believe that education, therefore, is a process of living and not a preparation for future life or future living. Education in your classroom, it shouldn't be designed to teach kids what to do in the future, but it prepares them through their lived experience to create their future. We're not telling them what will be because we don't know. It's kind of like with you. I have no idea what the classroom of tomorrow is going to look like or what it's going to be. I know I have a pretty good idea of what it's probably going to be based on the fact that we haven't changed it since the 1800s. But I can't tell you how you're going to teach. I can't tell you even what you're going to teach. I can provide you with the tools to make it your own. I can encourage you through questions and through a consideration of statements and concepts, and through these activities we do, I can help you understand who you are and what it is you want. But I can't tell you this is what you need to do, because that's not my future. It's yours. And then the next quote: democracy is more than a form of government. It is primarily a mode of associated living. Democracy is not just Congress and the president and the Supreme Court. It's not just legislature and executive and judicial. Democracy is this. It's the interaction of at least two people, if not more. It's a conversation. It's an exchange of ideas. That's democracy. It's conjoint communicated experience. I found the quote I wanted to read. I read this in class too. I said, and this is from Bill Ayers, and this I think this is powerful and goes right along with that democratic classroom sense. Democracy is not a spectator sport. The right to vote is foundational, of course, and extending and expanding the franchise against forces of restriction and suppression is critical. But voting is a means to democratic life, not democracy itself. When voting is manipulated by money and power, it becomes superficial. When the choices on offer are between Tweedledee and Tweedledum, they are meaningless. And when voting is no more than a formal exercise in ballot marking, it loses its essential purpose. Democracy asks us to learn more and to know more in order to make wiser decisions. Democracy demands participation. And if we think about our classrooms, are students engaging in democracy beyond a vote on what pet we should have or beyond a vote on what rules we should have? Do they participate every day in talking with their peers and exchanging ideas? It's important to think about. And so that's what we did at the beginning of class before we dove in to our questions and our agenda, which of course is how we generally start the class. But what we did first was exchanged with each other the lessons that we wrote. And so you want to make sure your lesson plan is submitted to me from last week. So if you go into Module 5, there is an activity for you to complete. And it was to identify a standard that you don't know anything about, watch a video about it, and then write a lesson plan about it. And we shared those lessons in class. And so I asked everybody to share their process for how they went through the lesson planning experience. We considered again how we're using Bloom's taxonomy to modify our thinking about writing objectives, trying to engage in active learning and being specific. We're trying to step back from the word understanding. It's not enough to say my students will learn. It's not enough to say my students will understand. You want to be specific. My students will argue. My students will compare and contrast. My students will develop. But then you have to think about, what does that look like in the classroom? How are they going to develop? How are they going to compare and contrast? How are they going to argue? And what are they arguing about? And so while we write objectives using Bloom's taxonomy, my students will take an action to learn, and they will express it in some way. And so again, with X, you have the action from Bloom's. My students will interview parents. My students will, here's a simple one. My students will take notes on the civil rights movement to learn about African Americans' fight for equality, which they will show on a test. There's an objective for you. It's a pretty bad objective, But that is basically the idea. So you have the action. They're taking notes. What are they learning through taking notes? Information about the civil rights movement. And how are they going to show that they know anything? They're going to take a test. Those are the kind of objectives we want to try and break away from. We also want to break away from the objective that say, my students will learn about the civil rights movement, specifically about Martin Luther King Jr., period. That's an objective that doesn't really say much. What are they going to do? How are they going to learn about it? How is that classroom going to be active? My students will read biographies about Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and they will write a dialogue between the two individuals, which they will then act out in class to understand the similarities and differences between the two views. That's a little more of an objective that tells us what's going on and guides the way you're going to plan your lessons. So make sure you've got your lesson plan submitted. And if you would, maybe think about these questions. How did you go through the process? Check your objectives. And then think about how are they going to do that in the classroom? We're going to start talking about procedures next week. Be a connoisseur. You know education. Be a connoisseur of education. We then came back to our C3 analysis, and I reminded everyone about the dimensions that we're looking at. Right now, we're primarily in dimensions 1 and 2 in our planning process. We're going to start moving into 3 and 4. Now, the planning process itself, let me move that out of the way so you can see this. Something like that. Sorry. There we go. Dimension 1 is the questions and inquiry planning. Dimension 2 are the strands that we've been talking about, civics, economics, geography, and history. The dimension 3 and 4, where we're going is, so in this, how do I actively engage students in civics, economics, geography, and history? When we know that, what are the materials we need to do that? What are the primary documents and primary artifacts that students can use to answer the questions that you're asking? And then ultimately, how do we take all of the learning beyond the classroom? Where does the information go? It's not enough that students take tests and quizzes and even make dioramas for the classroom. We want them to have public audiences. And that's just another look. This here is just another example of what those dimensions look like. We'll come back to those. And I asked you to share the lesson you looked at. So again, if you go back into Module 5, I sent you to a website. I said, pick the grade level that's appropriate for you and pick one of the lessons and look at it. Make sure you've done that. That's a good exercise because it'll help you see compelling questions, supplemental questions, and formative assessments, and get your mind thinking about what you want to do as you write your lessons, okay? And then we went back to the democratic classroom, and that's what we ended on. We ended on the democratic classroom, which is what this could look like. And then I shared a handout with you, and these are characteristics of democratic classrooms. These are examples of civic participation in the democratic classrooms and some thoughts about where we need to go. And so, for example, the goals we want to move away from is thinking that rules come from on high. Instead, we want to know that rules are established by the people. Thinking of rules as unchanging, understanding that rules are complex and that laws are always changing. It's a movement away from having a totalitarian classroom towards a more democratic classroom. And so this is also available in Module 5 at the very top of, you'll find this document, and I'll email it with this video link, okay? That's what we did in class. And I asked in the video this week, I said, I want to see this somewhere on your digital resume, not this handout, but these ideas. So I know this was only 15 minutes, but that is what we did in class. That's where we went and how we engaged. And so if you want, I'm going to leave this Prezi up for a couple more days. You can click through the Prezi and kind of consider the questions and think about the examples. And I will talk to you on Sunday. Thank you so much.